Let's start with a little motivation, like yesterday. So focus your mind. Check your check your mind whether it's balanced or not. Whether you have a positive intention or not. So try to focus on your intention. Generate a very positive intention for engaging in this session for the next 2 hours. So think of all the other sentient beings who make every experience of your well-being and happiness possible. Your parents, your friends, family, and then all the strangers who provide us with food, clothing, electricity, education, entertainment, technology, so forth, language, now and in the past, and as well in the future. And then even those who we tend to dislike, that tend to irritate and annoy us, who provide us with opportunities in this life, provide us with opportunities to practice patience. Right? And in past and future lives are also at times our friends, at times strangers. So try to generate a motivation not only to accomplish your own welfare, but the welfare of all sentient beings. Okay, so this today, there's again about 4 main outline headings that I discerned. So the first main topic, as Holiness spoke about in several different ways, was the importance of study, right? The importance of studying and learning. And then the second main topic was the difference between interpretive and definitive teachings, which we already spoke about a little bit yesterday. And His Holiness basically covered the same main points we covered yesterday. And then branching off from that, His Holiness spoke a little bit in more detail about the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dharma. So I'll try to explain that a little more today. And then kind of from there, His Holiness went into the text and he sort of reviewed some of the main points he'd made at the beginning yesterday in the text. And then he went on to the second section of the text, which is on the middle way, right? In this text, the essence of eloquence, the first, a little bit more than 1/3 of the text is about the mind-only school. And then the second 2/3 of the text are about the middle way school and the 2 divisions of the middle way school, the autonomous middle way first. Well, first there's a short section in general about the middle way school, and then there's a section on the autonomous middle way school, and then the last section is on the consequentialist middle way school. So His Holiness just taught a little bit today, mostly from the beginning of the section on the middle way school in general. So maybe we'll look at some of the verses His Holiness went through there. Okay, so again, I've compiled a few of the verses that His Holiness quoted yesterday in the same document I put up yesterday, but I just added more stuff to the same document. So you'll see there, anyway, I'll show you. This is day 2. Some new verses under day 2. So, okay, so first, a little bit about the importance of study. How did His Holiness start off exactly? Oh, His Holiness started like this, right? So at the beginning, the Chinese hosts, they recite the Heart Sutra in Chinese at the beginning, right? So apparently, it seems like in Chinese, I mean, I don't know Chinese, right? So I don't know. But it seems like in Chinese that they add 2 lines at the end. It seems like traditionally when they recite the Heart Sutra in Chinese, they add 2 lines at the end, which say, so I just translated these 2 lines today for you all, because I don't remember ever hearing them before. All right, I have so many documents open on my laptop. I don't know where. Here's all of them. All right, okay. So these two lines, they read like this. May the poisonous three delusions be dispelled. May the lamp of wisdom blaze bright. Right. So that's my little translation of them. Yeah. So basically, in Tibetan, it's two lines. Well, I made it two lines here too. So it says, yeah, may the poisonous three delusions be dispelled. Right. So the three root delusions are attachment, anger, and ignorance, right? So attachment, anger, and then the root of both of those is the ignorance grasping at inherent existence. So those are the three root delusions: attachment, anger, and ignorance. And they're called the three poisons, right? Because they cause suffering, right? Just as when we ingest poison, it causes us to, feel pain, discomfort, and suffering. Then when those minds arise in our mental continuum, mind of attachment, it causes us to be dissatisfied and crave after something and feel like hungry for something. Like we, in a sense that, when we feel hungry, there's a sort of discomfort and pain. Right? So we feel like we need to relieve that due to lack of food. So like when we feel attachment, we crave something and we feel like if we don't get it, we cannot be satisfied. So the opposite of attachment is just contentment, right? And just being satisfied with what we have. So attachment, when it arises in the mind, it disturbs the mind. I mean, it's important to know the definition of an afflictive emotion, right, is basically, well, it's a mental factor such that when it arises in our continuum, by nature, it disturbs the peace of our mind, right? So that's the main characteristic of, there's this one phrase in Tibetan, right, nyomo, which is translated in English alternatively in different ways, as afflictive emotion, as delusion, as disturbing emotion, and so forth. So, but when the afflictive emotions arise in our mind, their main function is to disturb the peace of our mind, right? So attachment disturbs the peace of our mind in one way. We crave after something and we don't feel satisfied. We feel like we cannot be satisfied unless we have it. Aversion or anger, when it arises in the mind, we focus on the unpleasant characteristics of something and we're repulsed by it, we dislike it, and we feel like we cannot be at peace until we're totally free from that, until we totally eliminate it, right? You get away from it. So it's a kind of repulsion. So attachment is a kind of attraction. Aversion is kind of repulsion. And then the root of those two is ignorance, grasping at truly existent self of persons, or self of phenomena. So that the way that functions is we grasp onto something as existing in a much more concrete and real way than it actually does. And then that gives rise to these other afflictive emotions. So these are called the three poisons, right? Attachment, anger, and ignorance, called the three poisons, because just like when we ingest poison, it causes pain and suffering. When those attitudes arise in our mind, they disturb the peace of our mind. So at the end of the Heart Sutra, they affix these two lines. May the poisonous three delusions be dispelled. May the lamp of wisdom blaze bright. So His Holiness spent quite some time explaining this, saying that, so how do we eliminate the three poisons? Through wisdom, right? It's not like we can just, drive them out of our room, like driving mosquitoes out of the room, or, catching a rat in our house and throwing it out. It's not like that. We have to eliminate the three root afflictions by changing our mind, by transforming our mind, right? And because the root cause of them is the ignorance grasping at the self as being inherently existent, which essentially means a kind of self that doesn't depend upon anything else, right? We grasp at ourself as a person and other phenomena as having their own entity or existing from their own side or existing by their own power, right? So, which means, so if something exists by its own power, it means for it to exist, it does not rely upon anything else, right? It doesn't have to depend upon something else for its existence, because whenever something depends upon another thing for its existence, then it exists through the power of that thing, right? So it's kind of like, well, maybe I shouldn't digress. I'll try to just not digress and rather save time for your questions, right? So, yeah, but this ignorance grasping at, so I'm saying the root cause of all the afflictive emotions, thereby the root cause of all of our suffering problems, is ignorance grasping at an inherent existence. And because it's a way of grasping at things as existing in a way that in which they don't actually exist, right? So how to get rid of that is to realize the way things actually do exist, right? To generate the wisdom. So that's why that line says, may the wisdom blaze bright, by the lamp of wisdom blaze bright. So, ignorance is like darkness. And when we generate wisdom, understanding how things actually do exist, then it's like we turn on a light in our mind and we make it bright, and that dispels the darkness of ignorance. So then from there, His Holiness talked about how the importance of study, right? So in order to increase our wisdom, increase the clarity of our understanding, we need to study. So that's the way to overcome afflictions. And then not just study, but combine these three, I think I mentioned yesterday, but hearing, contemplation, and meditation, right? Or study, contemplation, and reflection. So the first step is, we listen to Dharma teachings, we read books, but then it's not enough just to know what words are said in a book or to remember what words the teacher said. We have to kind of integrate that into our own worldview, into our own understanding, make sense of it for ourselves. So how do we do that? By questioning and analyzing and coming up with our own examples, and trying to put things into our own words. I always think about, when I was going to elementary school and learning how to write reports, learning how to write essays, do research papers, then, there's always a danger that the students are just going to copy, like if they have to give a report on what is a train, for example, that they just look up train in the encyclopedia and then copy out what the encyclopedia says about trains and then submit that as their report, right? But that's not really like a report. That's not really research because it's plagiarism in the first place. And also, just because you can copy someone else's words doesn't mean you understand what the words mean, right? So how do you show that you know what a train is you take the explanation that's in the dictionary or another book and you put it in your own words, right? And you give your own examples and you explain it, in your own way, basically. So that's kind of what the second step in the threefold process of hearing or study and contemplation and meditation. The second step, contemplation, means in order to really be confident that we know what something means, we have to put it in our own words and be able to express it in our own way and explain it, to others. So that's one reason why, in the traditional Buddhist study kind of program at ancient Nalanda Monastery and also in modern day Tibetan monasteries, like where I am studying, debate is such a big part of the program, because when you debate, you have to explain things in your own words, right, to others. So it really helps you to get an understanding for yourself. Yeah, so that's why in courses like this, we do discussion group to give people in the course a chance to explain things in their own words, and also a chance to ask questions and try to respond to other people's questions. So it's important to, that's an important part of study. So His Holiness talked about that, the importance of study, contemplation or reflection, and then also this third part, meditation, right? So meditation means we take the wisdom that we gain from study and contemplation, and then we try to make it more part of actually who we are as a person, how we live our life, right? So we actually try to change the way we see things, the way we think about things, and the way we live our life, the way we use our body, speech, and mind, and through habituation and familiarity. So here, I'll jump to screen share again, show you a verse by Tsongkapa that His Holiness quoted. So the second thing is Holiness quoted these two lines. I don't know where they came from. His Holiness said, Trulshik Rinpoche, it's one of his teachers, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And he's one of His Holiness teachers, Trulshik Rinpoche. Yeah, actually has kind of a close connection. Trulshik Rinpoche is also one of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachers. They have kind of a close connection. But Tsongkapa Rinpoche said these two lines to His Holiness, which I just roughly translated here. Something like, so His Holiness was making the point that it's possible that one can be very learned, be a great scholar and know a lot of words, be able to explain a lot of difficult points, but not make that actually part of one's practice, right, as a practitioner, not transform how one is as a person. So Tsongkapa Rinpoche making that point, he gave these two lines in Tibetan. Anyway, he said, a geshe is a flower of words. He has no fruits, samaya. So I'm not sure what samaya. Samaya is like Sanskrit, but anyways, basically it's meaning a geshe. It's possible a geshe is just someone who has a lot of words, flowery words, nice sounding words, but they have no fruit. There's nothing substantial there for you to eat. So it means they have no qualities. And then, so His Holiness quoted this verse by Lama Tsongkapa from a prayer by Tsongkapa explaining his own sort of path of study and practice. So here in this verse, Tsongkapa sort of summarizes the work of his entire life. His Holiness spent quite a lot of time explaining this. So he says, first, I sought out extensive learning. Then all teachings dawned as trainings. Finally, I practiced all day and all night, completely dedicated to the spread of the teaching. Right? So this lays out this threefold process of hearing, contemplation, and meditation. Tsongkapa says first, so it means in the early part of his life, and usually that's considered from about when he's 6 or 7, when he starts studying, until he's about 36 or so, 30, 36. So first I sought out often extensive learning. So it means he's again and again and again, he sought out different teachers from different teachings and reading different texts, analyzing different texts. So he focused on study, right? Then all teachings dawned as trainings. So then came a point when he understood the Buddha's teachings well enough that he could see anything the Buddha taught as personal advice for his own practice, right? So that's kind of the second of hearing, contemplation, and meditation. Contemplation means learning how to take everything we study into our own path, to make it a path of practice, whereby we actually try to transform, who we are as a person according to what is taught. And then finally, I practiced all day and night. So once we understand how to do that, then we apply ourselves to practicing, to really transforming ourselves by putting effort, right? And here His Holiness explained that, the Tibetan translators in the past, I'm not sure what the Sanskrit word for meditation is, but the word for meditation from Sanskrit, when they translate to Tibetan, they translate in two different ways, with two different spellings that have slightly different connotation. So one spelling means more like to become familiar with, or to become habituated to something, right? And then the other spelling means more to like, really sit down, sit in a cross-legged posture, sit straight, and really focus your mind on something and practice either placement meditation or analytical meditation, to meditate in a more formal way. So this word, in Tibetan, the word is gom, right? And there's the same pronunciation can be spelled in two different ways. So one spelling means more to just make yourself habituated to. So for like an attitude like, say generosity, for example, we can sit down in a formal meditation and actually practice, being generous. We can think about the benefits of generosity. We can actually imagine in our imagination, give to others, think what others need and give to others. But so that's like a more formal meditation. But in a more general way, we can just on a day-to-day basis, try to become more aware of what others around us are in need of and be more generous with our time, be generous with our attention, be generous with our words and our kindness, and just have the attitude of giving, right? So, and try to make that a habit of that until it becomes automatic. So that's another part of this process. So, so His Holiness talking about Lama Tsongkapa's practice. So Lama Tsongkapa, again, is the author of the work that His Holiness is explaining, Essence of Eloquence. And then in this first heading of the importance of study, then His Holiness talked about being a 21st century Buddhist, right? So now in the 21st century, where essentially, modern education is widespread, most of us have modern education, so it means we have critical thinking skills. We don't just believe things out of blind faith, but it's important not to believe things out of blind faith, but to question whatever we hear, to question whatever is taught, to question any assertions that anyone made, and see if they accord with reason and logic. Do they accord with our own experience? Do they accord with other things that we know to be true, or that we found to be true before? And so in that way, His Holiness said, maybe in the past, especially people like, Tibetans, and then the main audience here is the Chinese, who are the people born into traditional Tibetan, traditional Buddhist cultures. In the past, they tend to just believe whatever, the Buddhist teachers say because they're Buddhist and there's a Buddhist teacher and the Buddha said that. But now in the modern era, it's important not to do that, but to use critical thinking and apply effort to learn about what the Buddha taught and see if it actually accords with reason and logic and our own experience and other things we know to be true or not. So thereby generate wisdom that has a clear logical understanding of the Buddhist teachings, and thereby generates, and through that way, based on wisdom, then generate faith in the Buddhist teachings, based on clear understanding, right? Not just on blind faith. So His Holiness makes that point again and again and again. And then from there, His Holiness began explaining the essence of eloquence. So he again mentioned that first verse that we went through yesterday. I'm not sure I actually showed it to you yesterday. I'll just put it up on the screen now. His Holiness just quoted it again briefly. I read it briefly on this verse. Okay, so this, remember I was saying yesterday that it's not clear exactly what sutra this is from, because this verse, O bhikshus and wise men, just as a goldsmith would test his gold by burning, cutting, and rubbing it, so too you should examine my words and accept them not merely out of reverence for me. Right? So this is said to be spoken by the Buddha. It's cited by Arya Deva in his a text by him called "Gathering from All the Essence of Wisdom," and so it's perhaps from the sutra called the Sutra of Dense Egg, but that sutra seems to be no more in existence. So Tsongkapa quotes that verse at the beginning of the essence of eloquence, and His Holiness mentioned that again. All right, and then His Holiness went into an explanation of the difference between interpretive and definitive teachings and sutras and meanings and words, you could say. We get all those things, teachings or sutras or meanings or words you can define as being interpretive or definitive. So basically His Holiness said the same things I said yesterday. Well, first of all, why are there definitive and interpretive teachings of the Buddha? One reason is that because the Buddha taught to many different audiences. Remember Shakyamuni Buddha? He lived the life of the privileged life of a prince. He was married and had a child up until he was about 29. And then he left, in the middle of the night. He fled the palace, left his wife and child in the good care of his parents, I suppose, you could think. And then he practiced austerities in the forest for 6 years. And then at the end of that time, he became enlightened, right? So, of course, that's one way of understanding the Buddha's life. Another way of understanding all of that is that all of that was just showing an appearance in order to show his later disciples how to practice. That actually the Buddha was enlightened long, long ago before that, right? Shakyamuni Buddha. So, so then the Buddha became enlightened at the age of 36, and then until the age of 80, he taught, right? He wandered around the Ganga River Valley in northern India, and he taught the Dharma, right? So you can imagine during this, 44 years of teaching, the Buddha taught to many different kinds of people, right? Many different audiences that have different needs and who have different dispositions, who have different outlook and different worldviews. So that's why the Buddha taught very radically different things at different times, right? For the benefit of, in order to benefit different groups of people, the Buddha taught radically different things. So that's really kind of the basis for this whole text, the essence of eloquence. Is when you take all the sutras combined, you see the Buddha teaching radically different worldviews in different sutras. And so how do you make sense of that? What is really the truth about what Buddha is explaining about the world? And what is just a kind of a strategic means to gradually lead people to the truth by teaching them something that they can take on board, right? That they can, that will benefit them at that time, and then will kind of lead them along the path to understanding the final truth, right? So those teachings, which are not actually the final truth, but they're given in such a way that they gradually lead people to the final truth, are interpretive teachings, right? So usually when the Buddha was teaching, people who their mind was such that they're not really ready to hear the final truth, right? Because remember, in Buddhism, the final truth is quite radical, right? In that, the Buddha is saying, the way everything appears to you, nothing exists in that way. Like basically every consciousness we have as ordinary person is mistaken, right? Nothing exists in the way it appears to us. Not us, not our mind, not external things. All of that, the way, not that things don't exist, things do exist, but the way they exist is something completely different than the way they appear to us in our ordinary experience, right? So for some people that, and then the explanation of how things do exist is quite difficult, right? As probably you're experiencing by, I don't know, what day of this is the emptiness course? What day are you on?
Second week.
It's been 1 week?
Yeah, second week. No, it's been 2 weeks now.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. So you're probably experiencing some difficulty by now. I hope so. Not that I hope so, like I want you to have difficulty, but it's the explanation of emptiness is not easy, right? It's complex. So for many people, they would hear that, like, for me, that was almost the case. I remember the first time I heard a deep explanation of emptiness was by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala in 2001. He was teaching the great exposition of the stages of the path, which is like the seminal work by Lama Tsongkapa on the whole graduated path to enlightenment. So the last, I don't know, more than 1/3 of that text is all about emptiness. It's very extensive explanation of emptiness. And I totally didn't understand, but coming to these teachings day after day, sitting there all day, cross-legged in the temple, it's cold, it's rainy, and listening to His Holiness, and then His Holiness speak, which of course I can't understand Tibetan at that point, and then someone translating it, but the words I hear the translator saying just make no sense whatsoever. I got really annoyed. I was just like, what is this? Who is this supposed to benefit? So I'm sure if I'd been fortunate to be around during the Buddha's time, when the Buddha, if he were to first teach me, he definitely would not have taught me emptiness at first. Would have teach something else that's more like easy, more appealing, more easy to get your head around, like compassion, kindness, something. So in short, then why did the Buddha teach radically different things at different times? Because he taught what's most suitable to that specific audience at that time. So there's many teachings which are interpretable, but then for some very intelligent disciples or those with good imprints, then the Buddha did teach expressly emptiness. So that's why maybe just to come to the point of what His Holiness said about what's the difference between interpretive and definitive teachings are. Interpretive teachings are those which teach conventional truths, right? As opposed to ultimate truth. So conventional truths are things like, how to generate good concentration, how to generate bodhicitta, how to practice pure morality, compassion, generosity, all those parts of the path, right? The whole method side of the path. So any teaching which mainly teaches the method side of the path or conventional truths like, again, ethical discipline, compassion, kindness, the afflictive emotions, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering. Those are interpretive teachings. And then also teachings whose words cannot be taken literally. Those are also interpretive teachings. Those two different ways of distinguishing. Whereas sutras, or teachings which teach the ultimate truth, so it means teach emptiness, they mainly teach emptiness. Those are definitive teachings. And they should also explain emptiness in such a way that the words can be taken literally, right? Just like I said yesterday. So that's a definitive teaching. So, yeah. So then from there, His Holiness went into an explanation of the three turnings of the wheel, right? So that's really one of the main things explained in this text, the essence of eloquence, is the three turnings of the wheel. So right at the opening part, why don't I'll share my screen again and we'll just look at, I don't know if this is gonna work. This is gonna work. I'm not even sure. Oh, sorry, I don't have the right document open. We'll look at, just to let you know, if you can bring up on your own screen, we'll look at that document that we looked at yesterday where, what am I trying to say? Oh, I mean the Essence of Eloquence booklet, right? Hold on. Where is the actual text, that is Holiness is reading from. 1 second. All right. There we go. Okay, so here's this booklet. And I'll scroll down to where His Holiness is reading from. Because in the very beginning of this, this text, the Lama Tsongkapa, he quotes from what's called the intention, what is it, Dori Gongro, explanation of the intention of the Buddha. So this is an interesting sutra. It's from the third turning of the wheel, where in the Buddha's own words, so it's called, Elucidation of the Intention Sutra, right? So in this sutra, in the Buddha's own words, he talks about he talks about his own teachings and how to divide them up, how to understand them. So here it says, okay, the Lord proclaims in many discourses the intrinsic identity of the aggregates. So here, intrinsic identity is our key phrase. The Lord proclaims in many discourses the intrinsic identity of the aggregates. So this means basically inherent existence, that the aggregates are inherently existing. So the Lord proclaims in many discourses the intrinsic identity of the aggregates, their characteristics of production and destruction, their abandonment, and full understanding. As with the aggregates, so does he proclaim the 12 media, the dependent origination, and the 4 foods. Thus does he proclaim the intrinsic identity through knowledge and the meditation of the Four Noble Truths, the intrinsic identity, variety, plurality, abandonment, and full understanding of the elements, and the intrinsic identities, resistances, remedies, initial productions, maintenances, preservations, developments, and increases of the 37 accessories of enlightenment. Okay, so all from here up to there, basically what we need to understand, basically what the Buddha is saying is, in the first turning of the wheel, right? So there's 3 turnings of the wheel. In the first turning of the wheel, which basically means the Pali Canon, right? The whole Pali Canon as we know it today, which is again the sutras that are accepted as the word of the Buddha and followed and practiced in the Theravada countries, like Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand. That all fits in the first turning of the wheel, right? The whole Pali Canon is part of the first turning of the wheel. So the Buddha is here saying, in the first turning of the wheel, I taught that everything is intrinsically existent, or everything is inherently existent. So again, another way to say that is everything exists by its own power or from its own side. Okay? So now the second turning of the wheel. So where do we go up to? Okay, so then from on the other hand, the Lord also proclaims the intrinsic unreality, right? So here it's the exact opposite, right? The intrinsic unreality, non-production, non-cessation, primordial peace, the natural total liberation of all things, right? So this is the second turning of the wheel. So in the second turning of the wheel, which includes the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the most commonly known is which is the Heart Sutra. So in this document itself is the Heart. The Buddha says nothing is inherently existent. There's no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no feelings. So all those no means not intrinsically existent or not inherently existent. So basically in the second turning of the wheel, the Buddha teaches that nothing inherently exists, right? That's completely opposite from the first turning of the wheel, where the Buddha taught that everything inherently exists. So then, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to understand from that, right? So then, that's what the function of this sutra is. This, the elucidation of the Intention Sutra. So this is the main basis for the mind-only school, right? So then the question comes here. I wonder about this and earnestly inquire of the Lord the actual meaning of his proclamation of the non-production, non-cessation, primordial peace. Tsongkapa, so this is Tsongkapa's commentary. He says there is a verbal contradiction between the statements in some sutras that all things are devoid of intrinsic reality, right? So that's the second turning of the wheel, teaches that all things are devoid of intrinsic reality, and the statements of other sutras that proclaim the intrinsic identity or the intrinsic reality of all things, and so on, of the aggregates and so on. Yet the sutras should be free of contradictions, right? So why should the sutras be free of the contradictions? Because of the word of an enlightened being. Enlightened beings do not contradict themselves. They're not like politicians, no? They know the truth and they speak the truth. They never lie and they never contradict themselves. So what are we supposed to make of these sutras where the Buddha says one thing at one time and then it says totally the opposite thing at another time? Okay, so that's the function of this sutra, the elucidation of the intent, and it's the function of Lama Tsongkapa's commentary on it. So hence, I guess this is the name of the person in the sutra who's actually asking the Buddha about this. I won't even try to say it. He inquires into the intended meaning of the declarations of intrinsic unreality, thereby also inquiring by implication into the intended meaning of the declarations of intrinsic identity. So he's asking about, well, what does it mean when you said, you know, everything inherently exists on the one hand, and when you said nothing inherently exists on the other hand? What did you mean? So here the Buddha answers. He says, okay, Paramartha Samudgata. I teach the intrinsic unreality of all things, intending the following three types of such unreality: identity unreality, production unreality, and ultimate unreality. And then Asanga, so this is Asanga comments on that. With what intention does the Lord declare the unreality of all things? He declares it wherever necessary to educate disciples, intending the three types of such unreality. All right, so here, yeah, this text is really, it's a really difficult text. Actually, there's many Tibetan commentaries on this text because it's so difficult. Many people wanted to try to explain what it means. But to stick to the three turnings of the wheel, right? So in the first turning of the wheel, which is composed of the current Pali Canon, the Buddha teaches everything inherently exists. And the second turning of the wheel, which includes all of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, primary among which is the Heart Sutra, the Buddha teaches nothing inherently exists. So the second turning of the wheel is the basis for the two Madhyamaka schools, the consequentialist Madhyamaka and the autonomous middle way school. And then, or the two middle way schools, right? The second turning of the wheel is the basis for the two middle way schools. So then in the third turning of the wheel, which is mainly this sutra we've been looking at, the elucidation of the intention. In the third turning of the wheel, then the Buddha explains basically the mind-only school view of the world, right? So the Buddha explains, according to the mind-only school view of the world, what he intended when he said that nothing inherently exists. So and so what he, according to the mind, in this mind-only school view, then the Buddha teaches that all phenomena, everything that exists, is included in three types of phenomena, three different types of phenomena. So they're called other-powered phenomena. So all impermanent things are called other-powered phenomena. Why? Why are they called other-powered? Because they are produced by causes and conditions, which are not them, right? So think about yourself. What are the things that are causes and conditions which produce you? The most obvious is like our parents, and then like the food we eat, the education that we receive. So all the things which are causes of us are not us. There's something other than us, right? Our parents are other than us. The food we eat is other than us. The education we receive is something other than us, right? So we are produced by things, by causes which are other than us. And everything that is impermanent, everything that's a functioning thing, everything that's produced by causes, its causes are by nature something other than it, right? So that's why, and because we're produced by things that are other than us, then we're under the power of, right? Or we're produced through the power of other things. Therefore, we're called other-powered, right? So this first category is other-powered natures or other-powered things. The second category is called the thoroughly established. So, basically for the mind-only school, that just means emptiness, right? And why are they called the thoroughly established? I'm not sure exactly of the etymology. It doesn't come to mind right away. I'm sure I've studied it before, but forget half of what I study. So, but probably just because it's the ultimate nature of things, and it's called the thoroughly established. And then the third category is called kunda. What do you say in English? Something like the merely imputed, you could say, or the totally imputed, or basically imputed phenomena, right? So that means it's like abstract concepts. So these consist of all permanent phenomena other than emptiness or other than ultimate truth, right? So yeah. So for the mind-only school, everything exists in these kind of three types of phenomena: other-powered phenomena, thoroughly established phenomena, and you can think totally imputed phenomena, merely imputed phenomena. Yeah. So maybe just another way, maybe a more useful way to distinguish the three turnings of the wheel is that in the first turning of the wheel, the main thing the Buddha taught, of course, in the first turning of the wheel, the Buddha did teach that nothing inherently exists. That everything inherently exists. But the main thing he taught in the first turning of the wheel is the Four Noble Truths, right? Which we went through yesterday: the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, truth of cessation, and truth of the path. So, you remember the Four Noble Truths is the main thing the Buddha taught in the first teaching he gave in Sarnath, right? The very first teaching the Buddha gave after enlightenment was the sutra on the Four Noble Truths. And so, yeah, so that's the main thing he taught. So that's the main thing taught in the first turning of the wheel. The main thing taught in the second turning of the wheel, expressly, it teaches emptiness, that nothing inherently exists. So this is, the view or the highest view of emptiness, according to the middle way schools. So for the two middle way schools, so in your emptiness course, Venerable Droma is presenting mainly according to the consequentialist middle way school, right? Because in all four Tibetan schools, the Tibetan tradition, that's unanimously considered the highest view of emptiness. although there are different interpretations among the different Tibetan schools of what that view exactly is. But generally, the consequentialist middle way school is considered the highest. So according to the consequentialist and the autonomous middle way school, the second turning of the wheel is definitive, right? Whereas the first and the third are interpretive, right? So the actual view of emptiness is taught in the second turning of the wheel, according to the middle way schools. According to the mind-only school, the third turning of the wheel is definitive, and the first and second are interpretive, right? And then just to throw in one more bit of confusion, according to the the Theravada tradition, the Pali Canon, which of the three is definitive, do you think? The first one. The first turning of the wheel is definitive, and the second and third turning of the wheel are not even the word of the Buddha. There are some sutras made up later by some clever monks, right, later on. Right. So again, according to in the Theravada tradition, in the Pali Canon, generally, it's only the sutras that belong to the first turning of the wheel that are actually considered the word of the Buddha. The Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which were taught in Sanskrit, are largely held to be not even the word of the Buddha, right? As something made up later on. Yeah. So, but hold on. So I digressed a little bit. But so in the first turning of the wheel, the main thing taught is the Four Noble Truths, and that everything inherently exists. And the second turning of the wheel, the main thing taught is that nothing inherently exists. So the main thing taught is the view of emptiness, but also is explained extensively the Bodhisattva path, right? The 6 perfections. If you have the aspiration to become a fully enlightened Buddha, what is the path that you follow? How do you do that? What other trainings do you engage in, right? So that's also taught extensively in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, because there's this anomaly. In the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, like in the Pali Canon, it's very clear that like Shakyamuni Buddha has a level of realization that's far and above and the other arhats, right? But there's no explanation really of how the Buddha, there's no detailed explanation of how the Buddha attained that level of realization, as opposed to, so there's no explanation of the Bodhisattva path. Bodhisattvas are mentioned, fully enlightened Buddhas are mentioned, but there's no detailed explanation of how to become a Buddha. Rather, there's detailed explanation of how to achieve the state of an arhat, right? So there is that kind of anomaly. So that's one argument that why the second and third turnings of the wheel of Dharma are actually the word of the Buddha, is that because they explain this big obvious doubt that exists in the Pali Canon. But okay, according to the middle way school, and the Bodhisattva path is mainly taught. And then in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma is mainly taught the mind-only school view of the world. So why did the Buddha teach this additional view, the mind-only school view? For people for whom they're intelligent enough to see that all things, that the teaching that everything inherently exists is flawed. But for them, the view that nothing inherently exists whatsoever is too radical, right? So the Buddha taught in the third turn of the wheel, the Buddha kind of taught this sort of a middle way, right? Where some things inherently exist and other things do not inherently exist, right? So remember, so this is the mind-only school view. So remember, according to this mind-only school, then basically of the 3 types of phenomena, the last one, imputed phenomena, merely imputed phenomena, they do not inherently exist. Whereas the first 2, other powered and thoroughly established phenomena, they do inherently exist. So when the Buddha taught that nothing inherently exists, according to the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, he's talking about sort of varieties of things not inherently existent, according to the mind-only school. So basically, he's teaching that the main basis for all existent things is other powered phenomena, and other powered phenomena are empty of being imputed, right? They're empty of being imputed phenomena. And that emptiness of being an imputed phenomena is the ultimate nature of things. And that is the thoroughly established. That is emptiness according to the minority school. So that, oh, and then again, here His Holiness mentioned quantum mechanics, basically saying that quantum mechanics is similar to the minority school and the middle way school in the assertion that things do not exist in the way that they appear. Basically that. And that by understanding that things do not exist, things do not actually exist in the way that they appear, but their mode of existence is something very different. As we deeply understand that, then when we have attachment and anger arise, they're weaker and we can reduce them. Why? Because when we have attachment arise, for example, I mean, you all can check your own experience. I'm sure you can easily see this. But when we're very attached to something, it appears as if, like just say something like food, right? Some kind of delicious food we think is very delicious. Does it exist? Does it appear to your mind as if the deliciousness of that food is a projection of your mind, or that it's a property, it's an actual property of the food itself? That the food being delicious comes from the side of the food, or does it appear that it comes from the side of your mind? Right? I think we can say it comes from the side of the food. I mean, it looks like the food is delicious, right? Not just that, like, it appears to me like it's delicious. That doesn't appear to us. It looks like, yeah, that food is delicious. I can't wait to dig in, right? So that's just kind of a way that we think that the food actually appears in that way. But if the food that we think is delicious actually is delicious from the side of the object, then everybody who experiences it should experience it as delicious, right? But clearly that's not the case, right? Some people, the food that we think is delicious, some other people will think is just, you know, not so nice or disgusting, right? So the deliciousness of the food clearly is not from the side of the object. It's more from the side of our mind. So when we deeply see that things do not exist from the side of the object, things do not exist in the way they appear. So the food that we see as delicious, it appears to us as if it's delicious from the side of the food. When we see that clearly and deeply that that's not real, that's a false appearance, right? That's just an illusion. It's a projection of our mind. It's projecting onto the object something that's not there. And all our perceptions of things, all our perceptions of ourselves are like that. Then we stop believing so much we stop believing that things exist in the way they appear to us. We become much more skeptical, and we gain a much more deeper understanding of how things exist, and we don't take things so seriously in a way. So it reduces so then even if things appear very attractive to us, we recognize, well, that's just a projection of my mind, and we don't take it so seriously. So we don't become so caught up in craving and grasping. And the same with on the side of things appearing as unpleasant. You know, to think of the person you detest most in your world, or the person you find most annoying. You know, is that person annoying really from the side of the object? If it is, everybody who encounters that person should find them totally annoying. But that's not the case, right? So the annoying is really from the side of our mind, right? But it doesn't appear to us like that. It appears like, no, that person is really annoying. It's not just me, right? But when we realize that that's just an illusion, that's a projection of our mind, then also we don't take this so seriously. And so we don't get so irritated with that person. We remain more skeptical, more kind of reflective with regard to them. So in this way, just like if you think deeply about the truth of what quantum mechanics is saying about the things, how things exist, that they do not exist in the way they appear, that undermines our the basis for our afflictive emotions, right? So it reduces attachment and anger. And then His Holiness went on to read from, so maybe I'll just share my screen again and just briefly look at, I keep saying briefly, and already like 1 hour is almost gone. So His Holiness skipped down through the text very quickly, and at the end just briefly read from the middle way consequential school part of the text. Okay, session 3. Okay, so this is a nice sutra quote. It says, the savior Nagarjuna and his spiritual son Aryadeva did not differentiate interpretable and definitive meanings of a direct reference from the sutra source to portion number 2. Nevertheless, okay, so Nagarjuna and Aryadeva themselves, they didn't explain the difference between interpretive and definitive teachings based on a sutra source, but there is a sutra source, basically Tsongkapa says. This sutra, the teaching of Akshayamati Sutra, right? So here it says, which sutras, so again, this is a sutra, and I think it's someone asking the Buddha a question again. Which sutras are definitive in meaning and which are interpretable? Those sutras teaching superficial realities are interpretable in meaning. So remember, superficial realities means everything apart from ultimate truth. So all the conventional truths, like pure morality, like the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, bodhicitta. So those are interpretable in meaning. Those teaching ultimate realities or ultimate truths are definitive in meaning. Those teaching various words and letters are interpretable. Those teaching the profound, the difficult to see, the difficult to understand are definitive. So I was saying, if you're finding some difficulty understanding emptiness, that's what the Buddha predicted. Right here in the sutra, he says, those teaching the profound means emptiness, difficult to see, the difficult to understand, right? That's ultimate truth is difficult. Those sutras that teach as if there were, so this is important. Those sutras that teach as if there were an owner in ownerless, using various expressions such as self, living being, life, soul, creature, person, humanity, mankind, agent, experiencer, etc., are interpretable. Those sutras that teach the doors of liberation, the emptiness of things, signlessness, wishlessness, inactivity, non-production, creationlessness, non-occurrence, beginninglessness, lifelessness, personlessness, and ownerlessness, etc., are definitive in meaning. Rely on the later, not the former. Right? So there's in sutra, there's a definitive. So that sutra distinguishes between interpretable and definitive teachings according to the middle way view. And then again, I'll just point out one verse that His Holiness cited just near the end, which is, hold on, this is the wrong one. Okay, this is the wrong one. Oh yeah, that is the right answer. Oh yeah, there's this great verse by Shantideva. There's 3 verses by Shantideva that I didn't get to explain yesterday. They're really important now, and they're great for your personal practice. It's about the importance of exchanging self and others. So here's day 2. Okay, this verse is by Nagarjuna. So this is the opening homage in Nagarjuna's rude wisdom, or fundamental wisdom. He says, independent origination, there is no ceasing, no arising, no annihilation, no permanence, no coming, no going, no separateness, and no sameness. Right? So there's 8 pairs of things. No ceasing, no arising, there's 4 pairs, so there's 8 things, right? 4 pairs of things. No ceasing, no arising, no annihilation, no permanence, no coming, no going, no separateness, and no sameness. Independent origination. So it means all those, you have to add inherently existent, right? There's no inherently existent, ceasing, and so forth. So I prostrate to the consummate Buddha, the supreme among all teachers, the one who taught this peace, which is freed of elaborations. Right, so that's the kind of middle way view. And maybe finally one thing that is very helpful, kind of piece of advice His Holiness mentioned, was that one thing that's taught here in this section of the text is that it's called like the mode of reliance. So when we're looking for the truth, as a seeker of the truth, what do we rely on? So he says we rely on, instead of relying on persons, rely on what they teach, their words, what they explain, right? And instead of relying on the mere words alone, rely on the meaning of the words. And instead of relying on the interpretive meaning of the words, rely on the definitive meaning of the words, right? So there's kind of three deeper levels of kind of ways of searching for the truth. So when we're searching for the truth, don't just believe someone because they're famous or they're charismatic or they sound good, but listen to what they're saying, right? The words that they're expressing. Listen to what they're saying and analyze, is it actually true what they're saying or not? But don't just listen to the mere, the superficial meaning of the words, but think deeply about what they're saying and check what is the deeper meaning of what they're saying and is it true or not, right? And then don't just rely on the meaning itself, on the superficial meaning, but basically you look deeply at your own experience and see if it accords with your own most kind of profound experience of truth in a way. So is it typical in Tibetan? It's something like, don't rely on the person, rely on the words. Don't rely on the mere words, rely on the meaning. Don't rely on the interpretive meaning, rely on the definitive meaning. Something like that. Okay, so I'll stop there and try to answer any questions that you might have. Okay. So there's one question already in the chat, I think. Could it be that the statements made in the different turnings of the wheel are made from a different cognitive stance, namely the cognition of the senses or the cognition from inner sight? Okay, yeah, so there's this good question here in the chat. Could it be that the statements made in the different turnings of the wheel are made from different cognitive standpoints, namely the cognition of the senses or the cognition from inner insight? Yeah, it's kind of like that. Like in the first turning of the Wheel of Sutra, yeah. So because the audience for the first turning of the Wheel of Sutra was an audience for whom the philosophical view of the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School are most suitable, right? So for example, for the Sutra School, then they do consider as our ways of knowing the truth, they consider our sense consciousness, our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, as being the most powerful, the most useful. And what really, that they consider that the external world, what we can perceive about the external world with our sense consciousness, by what we see, hear, know, and touch. So this is kind of similar to a modern scientific view, that's what you can really believe. That's what's most believable. So of course, to the sense consciousness, it appears as if things do exist from their own side, right? Like if we don't analyze, when we look at things and they have certain colors, yellow or green or blue or black or whatever, without analyzing, it looks like those colors really are on those objects, right? That the object has that color independent of the way that we perceive the objects. But even modern science will tell us that, what we perceive as colors is, sunlight, which possesses, all the whole range of, the whole spectrum of colors. It shines on those objects. The objects absorb certain wavelengths of light. They reflect other wavelengths of light. When some of those other wavelengths of light in the visible spectrum that appear to our eyes, then we have the perception of those kinds of colors, right? So where does the color really exist? Does it exist in our eyes or does it exist on the object? I mean, because, so it's not clear, actually. I mean, actually we had anyway, it's not clear where the colors exist, but definitely the perception of color is not something that happens independent of our human eyes, right? Like other animals, they perceive other things of different colors. Like you can see these, photographs of the way bees the way flowers appear to bees, or you know, dogs see things with different colors, for example. So other animals, different animals, they see things differently. Things visually appear differently. Yeah. But so the first training of the Wheel of Dharma, yes, it's very much taught for an audience who feels that the sense consciousness is the primary way that we access the reality of things. Whereas the second and the third training of the Wheel of Dharma, they appeal much more to the mental consciousness. And when we critically analyze how things exist, you know, ignoring our sense consciousness and thinking deeply about how things exist, then what do we see? Yeah, so there you can distinguish kind of like that. Okay, Madhavji, glad to see your hand up again.
Yes, of course. I have a lot of questions, but this one, basically, I wanted to ask you, I know regarding the Vedas, you know, they talk about the heart, you know, and I know that's very important also in Buddhism. So I'm trying to ask your view on how important purifying the heart and how important that is in all religions actually, you know, but in Buddhism in this case.
Sure. Yeah, it's extremely important. I mean, purifying the heart is extremely important because, you know, if our heart is very, well, disturbed on the one hand, but very closed or very, you know, full of animosity, full of resentment, kind of negativity. We're very critical in the sense of we're always looking for faults in ourselves, or we're always looking for faults in others. So we're always looking at negative things. Then it clouds our heart. It makes it difficult for us to be compassionate and kind and forgiving and open-hearted, right? So when our heart is very closed and very negative, then it disturbs our mind because it causes anger, resentment, unhappiness. It also undermines our ability to have any joy. You know, when we always look at the faults of ourselves, we have difficulty being happy about anything about ourselves. When we look at the faults in others, we have difficulty really loving others, really, you know, seeing the good in others and wishing for them to really be happy, right? Because we're focused so much on just negative things and how bad that is, right? So when we have a mind that's clouded by this kind of negativity and narrow-mindedness, closed-heartedness, then it obscures our mind. It causes obscuration in our mind, where we have very difficulty seeing things in an unbiased way, in a neutral way, not to mention a positive way. Just we have difficulty seeing reality as it is because we become so obsessed with negative things, with what we perceive as wrong. And what we see as being wrong, we don't think that that's just my opinion, that I see that as wrong. We think those things really are wrong, like from their own side. So when we see faults in others, you know, in a very negative way, then we think that those really are inherent problems with that person, you know, bad things about that person. Again, just like the way we see food. When we see some food is disgusting, we don't see it as if it's just, that's the way I experience it as disgusting. We think the food really is disgusting from its own side. So with people, it's just the same. When we see people as abhorrent, as bad, we think they really are like that from their own side. And so that what am I saying? Undermines our ability. It undermines our ability to see the person as they really are, right? In a neutral way, and in a way that makes it possible for us to connect with them, you know, to feel closer to them, to be empathetic with them, to actually think deeply about what's going on with that person and how they experience the world, you know, to step into their shoes. It makes it difficult to step into another person's shoes. So another thing about, you know, our heart being clouded with negativity is we isolate ourselves in the world. Because we cut off, when our heart is open and we have empathy for others, then we connect with others and we feel connected with them. we can step out of our own view of the world and step into the other person's view of the world and imagine what it's like to be them and imagine what kind of problems they have. And thereby we feel closer to that person, even though they're not someone we know, we speak to or something, but because we can imagine what it's like to be like that person, then we feel closer to them, then we're more forgiving, and then we have more wisdom with regard to that person, right? And how to connect with that person. Thereby we have more wisdom with regard to what I can do to maybe help that person, right? So when our heart is closed, we cannot generate that kind of wisdom because we feel separated from the other person. So we can't really imagine what it's like to be them because we don't even want to, right? And so we can't generate the wisdom about how maybe I can help that person. And we don't generate the intention, right? So really closed-heartedness and kind of negative, pessimistic pessimistic view of ourselves, pessimistic view of others, it really impedes our wisdom and it strengthens our ignorance, right? Whereas just being kind-hearted, I mean, many people, I think they think that being kind-hearted, being optimistic, being idealistic, that's just kind of like being like naive. That's equivalent to being naive. That's equivalent to just living in a fairy world, living in the clouds kind of thing. But actually, I mean, optimism is actually much more, what do you say? It correlates much more strongly with wisdom, right? Looking for the positive in ourselves, looking for the positive in other things actually makes our mind more peaceful. Thereby our mind is more clear. Thereby our mind can see both the good and the bad, right? More realistically. And thereby we generate more wisdom and thereby we can act more skillfully in the world, right? So there's a strong correlation between compassion and wisdom and between cruelty and ignorance. Yeah. Okay, so now I'll take another question from the chat room here. What is the root that inherently points to, namely, is it inherently to the nature of reality or the reality as it appears in the person's mind? See, what is the root that inherently points to? Namely, is it inherently to the nature of reality or to the nature of reality as it appears in the person's mind? Okay, so I think this is Emilio, this is your question. So if I don't get it right, you clarify. But when we talk about inherent existence, we say that something inherently exists, which again is the object of negation for the middle way school, right? So you're asking, what does that point to? Is it pointing to the nature of, that we're saying, the nature of reality is that things inherently exist? Or is it pointing to the way things appear to our mind, that it appears to our mind that things inherently exist, right? So it's both, actually. When we talk about, so usually here, because generally we're explaining according to the consequentialist middle way view, right? Consequentialist middle way school, their view of the world. So for the consequentialist middle way school, then everything, for ordinary beings like us, everything that appears to our mind as if it inherently exists, right? So go back to this really simple, and when you have a doubt about, well, what does it mean to inherently exist? I mean, the most helpful example for me is always food, right? Think of whether food that you think is delicious, does it appear that the deliciousness is coming from the side of your mind or from the side of the food? Clearly, it appears as from the side of the food, but we can analyze and quite easily see that that's not really the case. The deliciousness is really the way I experience the food. It's not really the way the food is, right? Why? Again, because if the food really is delicious from its own side, everybody who tastes it, and anytime I taste it, it should always appear that way, right? That is a reality of the food. Just like, say some drink like coffee. Like coffee, some people think it's delicious and some people think it's disgusting. Right? So like coffee, I mean, the deliciousness of coffee is not an actual property of coffee. Because if it is, everybody should experience it as delicious, but not everybody does. I mean, a really good cup of coffee, right? So, but like coffee being moist, right? Coffee being liquid, or being moist and liquid, not solid and not dry. You know, coffee being moist and liquid, that really is a property of the coffee, right? Whoever experiences coffee, they experience it as being liquid and moist, not dry. I mean, if you're eating coffee powder for some reason, that's not coffee, that's coffee powder, right? Okay, that's dry, but it's not coffee. So coffee is always liquid. So that really is a property. So that's not inherently a property, but it kind of really is a property of the coffee. So that's just an example. So the Consequentialist Middle Way school, to answer your question, they're saying everything that appears to us appears as inherently existent. So that's an explanation in the way of our perception, that we perceive things as being inherently existent. But inherently existent means that we perceive inherent existence as being a property of the things, right? I mean, for things to inherently appear as inherently existent, the very meaning of that is that things seem to exist by their own power. They seem to exist from their own side, right? By the force of their own entity, not as a mere product of our projection, right? Not as a mere projection of our mind, but from the side of the object, right? So when we talk about inherent existence, we mean that the reality of things seems to be that they exist from their own side, independent of our concepts, right? Okay. So is there anybody in the Zoom room here have a question? If not, I'll go back to the chat box. Okay, I don't see any questions in the Zoom room. So in the chat box, in case you haven't seen it, you sent a couple of questions and a message on Telegram earlier today. I didn't see. There were some questions on Telegram.
And Emilio has his hand up.
You just take a hand on. Yes, Emilio.
Yep. If I can follow Venerable, hi everyone. Hi Venerable.
Mm-hmm.
If I can follow on yesterday's conversation, we were talking about emptiness and how that kind of is. I'm not sure if I understood this correctly. So, is it right to think that the remedy to dispel that false sense of self is abiding in the awareness of emptiness of the mind?
Emptiness,
so,
yeah.
Sense,
yes. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. So there's no of a sense of psychological need, but we experience existence as a presence of that vast emptiness, and then sort of be patient and having a compassionate attitude in that the qualities to define the steps in the practice.
I don't understand. Can you repeat? Let me put my headphones in.
So would the remedy, okay. So would the remedy for, let me start again. So the remedy for dispelling false or be abiding in the awareness of the emptiness of the mind, in the sense of being comfortable in being with a mind that is not grasping any concrete sense of psychological me, but resting in the presence of that simple emptiness, or that vast simple emptiness, as how it appears to the mind somehow. And then once we experience that, being patient and I'm saying compassionate in the sense of perhaps a sense of self-love or compassion in that space, in abiding in that space. Is that an accurate way of looking at the practice, or the qualities of the practice in that?
Yes, that's very accurate. Yeah, that's a very good way of looking at it. Except, I mean, I'll just kind of add or modify a few things. One is, I mean, you're emphasizing the emptiness of the mind, right? Abiding in the emptiness, in the recognition of the emptiness of the mind. I mean, that's very good, of course, and that's very important to analyze our own mind, to see the emptiness of inherent existence of our own mind. Why? Because, I mean, the existence of the mind, like our mind and other people's minds and mind in general, is the very basis of existence. I mean, if there's no consciousness, then what does it mean for things to exist? I mean, in the Buddhist worldview, Buddhist philosophy, the definition of an existent phenomenon is something which is an object of observation of a valid cognizer, right? So it means for something to exist, it must be realized. If something is not known, it does not exist, right? So knowing, you know, the act of knowing, the mind which knows, is a very basis for existence, right? So, I mean, so that's one reason that, and everything, you know, everything that exists, we can divide everything that exists into either being an object or a subject, right? I mean, so everything that exists in is either an object of awareness or an awareness, which is a subject, right? So, of course, inanimate things, that, you know, things we see, smell, taste, touch, they're all objects, right? They're not subjects. Whereas as a person, we're a subject, right? Primarily as a person, of course, we're an object. Other people, I mean, everything that exists is an object. But when you divide things into these two classes, then, you know, like inanimate things are primarily objects, whereas persons and consciousness or minds, they are objects, but primarily they're more important in being subjects, right? So, and those two, something being an object or a subject, they're mutually dependent. You know, without having a subject, you have no object, right? Without a mind which is aware of something, then there is nothing which is an object of awareness, right? And so there is no existence. And without there being objects which awareness is aware of, then what does it mean to be aware, right? To be aware, to be a mind, the mind must experience an object, right? So the consciousness or mind or subject, they depend upon objects, and objects depend upon subjects, right? They're mutually dependent. Thereby, they're both empty, right, of inherent existence. Why? Because they don't exist independently of something else. They exist independence on other things, right? But within objects and subjects, subjects are primary, right? You can say. So therefore, yes. But you're asking more about how do we practice emptiness? Yeah. Basically, what we do is we do generate an experience to whatever degree we can. So we have to accept that on, you know, as a beginner, we're on a beginner level. As an intermediate, we're on intermediate level. I mean, in terms of our understanding of emptiness, we begin at the beginning and then we progress, right? So whatever level our understanding of emptiness is at, that's okay, right? And that's good. So, so whatever understanding of emptiness we have, we generate that through doing an analysis, whatever analysis we know. And then, yeah, we try to maintain like we come to a kind of conclusion in our analysis. You know, like yesterday at the meditation we did at the end yesterday, we looked at we were looking at the impermanence of our body. Remember at the beginning, how our body is impermanent, it's changing moment by moment, and yet our body exists through time. Right? So how is it that this one thing, my body, exists through time, and yet it's changing moment by moment, right? So we analyze, and we should come to the conclusion that something like, well, what that means is my body is something that's imputed upon this chain of events, right? This series of moments that where each one is different from the previous one by a little bit. So there's this series of moments whereby the body is changing moment by moment through time. But upon that stream of events, I label body, my body. And that's how my body exists, right? So then we come to the conclusion that, oh, the body isn't something that exists independently from moments in time, or exists independently from change, or it has some kind of solid independent existence, but rather it's something that exists as a product of being imputed upon a collection of parts, in short, right? So then we come to that understanding, and then we try to remain in that awareness, right, for as long as we can. But for most of us, it doesn't last very long, right? Quickly, we get distracted. We find ourselves thinking about something else. So then we do the analysis again, right? And then we come to the conclusion again, and then awareness of emptiness. And then we try to remain in it again. So that's why at the, you remember the very first verse we looked at yesterday at the beginning of the text His Holiness is explaining, where the Buddha, it said, the Buddha teaches emptiness through hundreds of doors of reason, right? On the basis of hundreds of different kinds of reasoning. So it's very important to use many different lines of reasoning to come to to break down this grasping at inherent existence, right? We use all different kinds of reasoning. And so sometimes we focus on one, sometimes we focus on another, sometimes on another, but they bring us to similar conclusions, which break down our grasping at things with reality. And then, yeah, we try to habituate ourselves to that awareness. But, you know, really, the key thing about, you know, in generating an awareness of emptiness is to generate an awareness of dependent arising, right? The key thing is dependent arising. It's dependent arising, which is the doorway that, you know, it's like, I don't know, it's like the thing that leads us to understanding of emptiness. And it's the doorway, it's the gateway to understanding emptiness. It's the best reasoning. Like His Holiness said, why is it, one of the questions today, this morning was, you know, why is dependent arising called the king of reasonings to understand emptiness? And his answer, His Holiness said, you know, because, so you know what, I mean, you guys have been talking about dependent arising, right, in the course. I mean, things exist in dependence upon causes and conditions. Things exist in dependence upon parts. Things exist in dependence upon relation. Like, you know, in the world, where is East, right? We call, like Asia, we call the East. Europe, we call the West. But that's assuming we're standing somewhere in the Middle East, right? If we're standing in the Middle East, yes, Asia is to the east and Europe is to the west. I mean, if you go, you know, one way around the world, but if you're, you know, if you're standing in, you know, India, like I'm in India, then, well, yeah, then like Pakistan is the west, or the Middle East is the west. It's not the Middle East, it's the west. No, so east and west is totally relative. You know, is my hand long or short? Well, and compared to what, right? So many things are, or you know, subject and object. Things exist in compared by only by comparing to other things, right? So so there's dependence upon causes and conditions, dependence upon parts, dependence upon comparison, and dependence upon mental imputation. So it's looking at all those different kinds of dependent arising. You know, it's much more easy to be aware of dependent arising, and you know, especially your mind. I mean, look how your mind is changing all the time. You know, if we generate continual awareness of dependent arising, that really leads us to awareness of emptiness. So why is dependent arising called the king of reasonings to understand emptiness? Because if we understand emptiness through the reasoning of dependent arising, it dispels the two extremes, right? The extreme of nihilism and the extreme of eternalism or permanence. So why does it, why dependent arising, why does it dispel the extreme, of nihilism? Because if we see that something is a dependent arising, that verifies its existence, right? If we see that something is a dependent arising, we know it exists, right? Because we see that, well, it depends upon parts, it depends upon causes and conditions. It is changing. If it doesn't exist, it's not changing, right? Because it doesn't even exist. So if we see that something is dependent upon other things, interacts with other things, then we know it exists. So so even while we're analyzing emptiness through the reasoning of dependent arising, there's very little danger that we fall into the nihilistic view that nothing exists, right? Because we're habituating ourselves to recognizing that things do exist. But at the same time, because looking at dependent arising, it shows us that, everything that exists through relationships with other things, and that apart from those relationships with other things, with things that are not it, there's no way to speak about the existence of things. Like, look at ourselves as a person. I exist, yes, but then what am I actually? Am I my body? No, I'm not my body. This is my body. I'm the possessor of the body. The body is something I possess. I'm the part possessor. The body is a part of me. Okay, I'm not my body. No. Am I my mind? No, because I possess my mind. This is my mind I'm experiencing. So I'm not my body. I'm not my mind. But then if I inherently exist, I should be able to separate out my body and my mind, like on one side of the room, in your imagination. And then the other side of the room, I should be able to find me, the real me, the inherently existent me. Because if I inherently exist, means I exist in a way that I do not depend upon anything else. I do not depend upon my body. I don't depend on my mind. I don't depend upon my parents. I don't depend upon my thoughts. I don't depend upon concepts. I really exist somehow. But if I separate out the parts of me, my body and my mind, and then I look for some other essential I, cannot find anything, right? So thereby recognizing that I exist, yes, but the way I exist is that I exist totally independent upon my body and my mind and the other parts of me. So by recognizing that, I verify I exist, but also that deep understanding of interdependence, it undermines this view of inherent existence, right?
So the goal in that practice would be to expand those times where we are in that spaciousness and expand the perception of our identity, of the identity. I'm not sure whether I'm going to verbalize this correctly. Expand, but having that experience of emptiness not only through our mind, but through what we see or what we perceive as our surroundings, yet at the same time being able, let's say, to perceive in 3D and to perceive from the internal space without having a conflict between one and the other.
Yeah, you could say it like that. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and also you related to, the mind of love and kindness earlier. We should always, the basis of our meditation should always be, a motivation of loving kindness and compassion. Why are we even investigating emptiness in the first place? Because we want to be a better person, because we see we are suffering, other people are suffering. We want to do something to relieve this suffering, right? Because we want to be happier. We want other people to be well, to be happy. So we should always, our meditation on emptiness should always be conjoined with loving kindness and compassion, for sure. But yes, the way you explained about, general awareness is good. What it's important to know the reasoning clearly. You have to have the logical side very clear, but then you use that logic and reasoning to come to a sense of spaciousness and a sense of interconnectedness of self and other and all things. One technique which is not taught so much in sutra, but is that, because one of the big problems we have is a kind of low self-esteem that we chronically have, where we identify with our negative states of mind. We identify with our ignorance, basically. We see things in a very ordinary way. Things appear as inherently existent. We believe they really exist like that, but that's just who I am, right? We identify with these, because we've had this ignorance grasping at inherent existence since the beginning of our lives. And we've, probably before this life, we've never really had much doubt about whether, things really exist in the way I perceive them. And so, of course, we're strongly habituated to that one view of the world, which the Buddha is saying is completely wrong, right? So, but the problem is that we're so habituated to seeing the world in this wrong way, right? So a powerful antidote to that is when we meditate on emptiness, to imagine that everything, everything, the whole environment and us, all the inhabitants environment, including us as a person, we dissolve into emptiness, like we dissolve into space. And that space is pervaded by wisdom realizing interdependent arising and emptiness, right? Dependent arising, emptiness, two sides of the same coin. But we imagine everything dissolves into space, and that space is pervaded by pure wisdom, knowing ultimate truth. And then we strongly identify with that. We think this is me, this is the real me, this wisdom. And then we arise, in whatever form we want. So if you're, your ordinary form, if you want to just arise in your ordinary form, whatever, then you arise. But instead of thinking this is the ordinary me, the same as before, you think I am an embodiment of wisdom, knowing ultimate reality. And then you try to do everything you ordinarily do out of that, in that worldview, right? So you try to personally identify with wisdom, and of course with loving kindness and compassion. You can do the same with any other positive quality of mind. But it's important not just, so the difference is not just thinking, oh, I'm this ordinary kind of, troubled, ignorant, foolish person, and I'm trying to develop loving kindness and compassion and wisdom realizing emptiness, right? Instead, we just dissolve everything we ever thought we were into emptiness and spaciousness and purity, like our pure nature, basically. Remember our pure potential for full enlightenment. Dissolve everything and think, okay, ultimately all I am is a pure potential for full enlightenment. And then think, well, what does enlightenment mean? What do I want to do? I want to have perfect loving kindness. I want to have perfect generosity. I want to have perfect energy. I want to have perfect wisdom. And then we imagine, to whatever degree we can, we imagine all of those qualities, and we completely identify with those. We think, okay, I'm going to identify with these qualities, and forget about that old view of myself, that old kind of corrupted view of myself. I'm just going to generate a pure, positive view of myself. So that's kind of a method. It's like, I always think about like, well, I don't know, Olympic divers. I don't know, for some reason, just maybe an anomaly of my mind. I think about like Olympic divers, when they climbing, like platform diving, they climb way up on that high platform above the pool. And you see them imagining like how they're going to twist and turn and flip and stuff before they hit the water, like before they actually jump, right? So it's kind of like that. You imagine, you take the result into the path. You imagine what you want to actually be. And instead of seeing yourself in a very limited way and imagining that result is kind of out there, you imagine I'm actually becoming that result right now, and then practice with that.
So, in what you're saying, like I see the value of having a reason-based stepping stones towards getting to the doorway of emptiness, but at the same time, the same mechanics of using that that cognitive pathway reinforces the fact that I am not. When you're saying it's about more seeing the patterns of the mind that actually limiting and letting those dissolve, is almost like two different paths. One is kind of hinting at dissolution and seeing having a direct experience, and the other one is using reasoning to get to that doorway. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah. That's yeah, I want to get to some of the other questions here.
Sure, please.
So Theo is asking, are the aggregates considered parts of a person as much as any other part, or points around which parts gather? If so, how can we refute their inherent existence? So the aggregates, yes, the 5 aggregates, the form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness, the 5 aggregates. Yeah, those are considered the main parts of the person. All the parts of the person are included in those 5 aggregates. So the form aggregate includes all the physical parts of our body, right? Our whole body, all the physical parts of us are included in the form aggregate. And then all the other parts of our being, most of which are consciousness, are included in the last 4 aggregates. So feeling, all of our mental, physical feelings are in the second. Our discrimination is our thinking, oh, this is this is that, this is good, this is bad. That's all in the discrimination aggregate. And then all the other mental factors, right? So there's a lot of other mental factors. Those are all included in the fourth aggregate, the compositional factors. The fourth aggregate, compositional factors, is kind of a miscellaneous catch-all category. Like all of our karma, all of our other afflictive emotions, all of our positive emotions, they're all included in that fourth aggregate. And then the fifth aggregate, the consciousness, is mainly we're talking about the mental consciousness there. It's talking about main minds versus mental factors, right? So mainly it's talking about the sixth main mind, the mental consciousness, but it also includes the others. So are they considered parts of a person as much as any part? Yes, they're the main parts, and the parts around, no, so they're groups that include all the parts. So how can we refute their inherent existence? Yeah, that's the key part of the question. How do we refute their inherent existence? Well, we do the same analysis as we do with regard to the person, right? So remember, there's different kinds of analysis, but the simplest and the basic one, the one we want to focus on at the beginning here is, like with regard to the person, think, okay, yes, I'm a person. How do I seem to exist? Yeah, it seems like I just exist. I'm just there. There's no question. I'm just there, exist as a person, without, specifically relying on anything else. I just exist. But then, okay, but is there this real person who just exists from its own side? Then we look, okay, well, if so, I should be able to find that real person, right? So then we look within the body. Am I the body? Am I any part of the body? No. Then we look within the mind. Am I the mind? No, because the mind, it's my mind. I'm possessed with the mind. I'm not the mind. I'm not any part of the mind. No, okay. So then, do I exist separate from the body and mind? No. Thereby, I must depend upon the body and mind. How do I depend? I'm something that's labeled upon the collection of body and mind, right? So that's the analysis. So we do the same analysis with regard to the person. Remember, I was doing yesterday with regard to like my hand or any part of, we do the same analysis with regard to the body. Right? The same analysis that we do with regard to the person, we do with regard to the body or any part of the body. Remember with the hand yesterday, I was saying, okay, but then it seems like my hand really exists. But if my hand really exists, I should be able to find something that is my hand, right? But I can't. I find my pinky, my ring finger, my middle finger, my pointer finger, my thumb, the skin, the palm, the bones, the tendons, all the cells. None of those are my hand. And yet if I take away all those parts, I don't have a hand. So what is the hand? It's something that's labeled on the collection of parts. And then we do it the same with our mind. So any part, we do the same all the way down, right? So there, and I don't know, Western philosophy is just saying like, whoa, what's at the bottom? When you analyze, critically to see how things exist, and you go down, 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 deeper and deeper layers, what's at the bottom? And then apparently someone at some time just said, well, it's turtles all the way down. Someone who thinks the basis of the world is a turtle, like a giant turtle, then well, what's at the bottom? Well, that's just below the turtle is another turtle, and below that's another turtle. It's turtles all the way down. So here, for Buddhist, it's merely imputed by the mind all the way down. The person is merely imputed by the mind on the aggregates, right? The body and mind. The body is merely imputed by the mind on its parts. The parts of the body, the hand and so forth, they're merely imputed by the mind on their parts. Those are merely imputed on cells. Those are a little easier to see. Mental consciousness is a little more difficult. My mind is imputed on all the different parts of my mind. Like my feelings, for example, well, feelings is a term applied to a whole group of feelings. So there's different feelings. Each of those feelings is composed of moments in time, and on and on and on. Yeah. Okay. 2 thumbs up. Good. What is the role of chanting, prayer, rituals in Buddhism and in achieving the 3 essential trainings? Ethics, wisdom, and concentration. Yeah, ethics, concentration, and wisdom. What is the role of chanting and prayer and rituals in Buddhism? Yeah, very nice question. Yeah, because it is a lot. I mean, in Buddhism, we do a lot of chanting, do a lot of prayers. do a lot of rituals. I mean, varies person to person, but you know, traditional Buddhists do a lot of prayers. I mean, they each have slightly different functions, but I mean, basically, they all function to remind us of the essential meaning of the Buddhist teachings and to help us generate and cultivate positive states of mind, like kindness, compassion, you know, faith, concentration. You know, first of all, whenever we're doing chanting or prayers or any kind of rituals, we need to do so with a focused mind, not a distracted mind, right? So already doing chanting or rituals, it's a way of focusing our attention on something. And then, you know, when we're chanting prayers, the prayers generally are composed by enlightened beings, by very highly realized beings. So the words and the meanings they express are very beautiful on the one hand, but also very inspiring. And they're words that remind us of the essence of the Buddhist teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the three higher trainings, you know, kindness, generosity, independent arising, wisdom, faith. So they remind us of all the positive qualities which we aspire to develop, the words of the prayers and the rituals. Even we're saying a mantra like Om Mani Padme Hum. I mean, Om Mani Padme Hum, it's like mantra means to protect the mind, right? So the purpose of saying mantra is to protect our mind. How so? By reminding us of, or bringing to mind, kind of good attitudes, positive attitudes. So Mani, Om Mani Padme Hum, the Mani means jewel, and that actually is a symbol for bodhicitta, for the aspiration to become enlightened, in order to benefit all sentient beings. Padma means lotus. The lotus is a symbol of the wisdom, and the wisdom knowing the ultimate nature of things, right? So that if we know the meaning of the mantras, like Om Mani Padme Hum, then it reminds us of, you know, the attitudes we aspire to develop: wisdom, realizing emptiness, and, you know, bodhicitta, this aspiration to become enlightened, in all sorts of things. So yeah, basically that's kind of the function of those. All right, I'll answer one more question. All right, okay. So then someone asked here, what are the criteria for determining whether a text is really the word of the Buddha? Okay, what are the criteria for determining whether a text is really the word of the Buddha? Yeah, good question. Yeah, that depends who you ask. A big one. I mean, if you start with like, we're going to have, you know, have been written, you know, at certain times, and see if they're similar or dissimilar. They might look at people who are referred to in a text, the names of, especially kings, right? Because some of the oldest records we have are kind of records of the names of kings and different rulers who existed in the past. To see, well, what are the names mentioned in like a sutra, Buddhist teaching, the names of the people, and especially the famous rulers that existed, and do those correlate with other, you know, what we know about at what times different rulers existed and so forth. And then of course there's carbon dating, right? But that's just the paper that the text is written on. But in a more traditional, and then yeah, you look at whether a text is, you know, like in Buddhism, so the Buddha taught around 500 BC, thought to have taught around 500 BC, but for almost 200-300 years, none of the sutras were written down. They were all just passed from generation to generation by people memorizing and reciting, and you know, and then passing down orally. It was passed down orally. So only about 200 years after the Buddha passed away were the first sutras written down. And then shortly after that, some of the first sutras were translated into Chinese. So then if, you know, you want to know if a sutra was actually the word of the Buddha, one way is to look back, well, to see, was it was it also translated into Chinese very early on or not? Does it exist in the Pali canon, in Pali, or which was, Pali, which is translated from, I think, Devanagari script or some other earlier script. Pali was not spoken at the time of the Buddha. But was it is it in the Pali canon? If it's in the Pali canon, it's in the Chinese canon, and it's also in the Sanskrit or the Tibetan canon, then yeah, it's probably the word of the Buddha. You can verify that way. But another way to verify is, well, logically, does it make sense that the Buddha would have taught this or not? And is there a way to explain how this teaching arose that's not, it's not a teaching of the Buddha? Is there, is it in case that someone made it up? I mean, one criteria is Holiness Dalai Lama often relies upon is, well, the earliest Buddhist scholars that we know of, like Nagarjuna, is said to have existed 400 years after the Buddha passed away. So, scholars whose works we have now, like Nagarjuna's, who existed very much closer to the time when the Buddha actually existed. What do they have to say about what is actually the word of the Buddha and not, right? So if we can find, Nagarjuna referring to certain sutras as the word of the Buddha, because, he existed so much closer to the time of the Buddha, and he's someone who's very critical thinking, not someone who just easily accepts things, but someone who accepts things only on the basis of very sound reasons. Then we can be quite confident that it actually is the word of the Buddha. Yeah, those are some of the main criteria. And then also, if we can find very early dated, for example, I think it's the King of Concentration Sutra. There's a collection of sutras, for quite some years until recently, many Western scholars, they thought that the Sanskrit sutras in general only arose quite long after the Buddha passed away, long after the sutras of the Pali Canon arose. But I think just within the last 10, 20 years, there was this whole cache of manuscripts found in Afghanistan, buried in some cave that were unearthed. I forget the name of the collection. There's a name of this whole collection, but it was a big find. And by carbon dating, they're found to be dated to just like 300 years after the Buddha passed away. So they're as old or older than the oldest Pali Sutra scripts. So it's, even in academia, the view on what are the earliest sutras and thereby what are considered to most likely be the actual word of the Buddha is changing. It changes with new archaeological discoveries as well. So yeah, in short, there's many different criteria, and it's quite complex to try to understand. It's not easy. But another way, to which most of us, I think, probably fall back to is, what do our own teachers accept? What's the inherited wisdom that's been passed down, from generation to generation, from the time of the Buddha, by those, in each generation, by those who are responsible for upholding the Buddha's teaching in each generation, right? So in our generation, in the Tibetan tradition, this is His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and then other, leading kind of teachers of Buddhism. And so, yeah, I quite trust His Holiness to have inherited quite a correct interpretation of what is the actual word of the Buddha and whatnot. But yeah, there's many different ways to check. So yeah, I'm sorry we took up a lot of time with questions today. So now we're down to our last 5 minutes. So there's not much time to meditate, really. But yeah, we can do a little bit. Why don't we just sit quietly for a few minutes at least, and then meditate a little bit, and then we'll dedicate. So I'm closing the chat box. So yeah, direct your attention inwards. Take a few deep breaths. Remember the importance of not leaving, things that we learn about, things we discuss about the Buddhist teaching. The importance of not leaving things at an intellectual level, but actually trying to take things into practice. So one very helpful advice, at the end of a long day of teaching, after a talk, we listen to a talk by His Holiness, another teacher, we're going to read a book for an hour or two, or we have a discussion like this, like we've been having for the last 2 hours. A very helpful piece of advice is, well, don't try to remember everything, because that's unrealistic, but at least remember 1 or 2 points that stand out to us, right? That resonate with us, that for some reason seem significant to us, and try to just remember that point. So I ask you, quiet your mind, and then just try to think of at least 1 point from this discussion we've been having, or from His Holiness teachings, or Venerable Dharma's teachings today. Just to at least remember one thing that stood out to you, and just spend some time reflecting on that. Okay, so let's dedicate. So think of, rejoice in all the merit that we've created, oneself, the others in the course, the others in this session. Think of all the merit we've created by trying to, discuss, gain a deeper understanding of the Buddhist teachings on emptiness, and interpretive and definitive teachings. And then think of all the merit created by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, continually trying to teach and benefit beings his entire life and previous lives, countless previous lives, engaging in boundless enlightened activities. Just in this one life, think how much His Holiness has benefited the world, how many people's lives he's affected and transformed. How tirelessly and selflessly His Holiness works to benefit others, to teach and advise and encourage others. Right, and then rejoice in all the merit, all the virtue created by all the enlightened beings, throughout the universe, and all ordinary beings as well, like ourselves. with a positive motivation, engaging in activities to benefit others. Right, so all this merit, we gather together and then make prayers. So first, just look in your own mind, think what comes to mind of people or causes you'd like to pray for. Bring those to mind. All right, so we pray for all of those, each of your wholesome intentions. And then as well, think of all the people suffering most in the world now that we can see, know about. People trapped in civil wars, like in Syria, in Syria or other places where there's widespread violence, places in Africa, South America, or even in domestic abuse everywhere around the world. People suffering from oppression, as in Tibet, Hong Kong, Belarus. People suffering from hunger and thirst, loneliness and depression. So many people suffering from sickness or fear of illness during this pandemic. So may all these beings be freed from these various forms of suffering, and may all the causes to alleviate these forms of suffering quickly manifest. Especially here in India, where the pandemic is, the number of infections is becoming more and more. The pandemic, and all around the world, that is, pandemic quickly come to an end. And then think of animals as well. Countless animals suffering around the world due to natural disasters, drought, floods, fires, and especially those animals raised in confinement for human consumption. Being raised in unbearable, inhumane conditions, and being slaughtered day after day. May all their suffering come to an end. All right, and may humans come to respect the lives of animals, not to mention other humans. And then the global climate destruction, global climate warming due to pollution of the atmosphere. May that quickly be resolved, come to an end. Yeah. May the planet become a perfect, like a paradise for spiritual practice, with all the best possible conditions for beings to realize renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom, realizing emptiness, and full enlightenment, and to not harm and only benefit one another. And may there be harmony between all the different religious traditions. May Tibet quickly be freed. And may teachings on loving kindness, compassion, mental health, as His Holiness, mental hygiene, as His Holiness often promotes, may they spread throughout the world exactly in accordance with His Holiness' vision and wish. And on a personal level, may all of our actions never cause the slightest harm to any being, be it ourselves or others, and only contribute to the benefit and well-being of ourselves and others. Okay, thank you all very much, and have a good evening wherever you are, and yeah, hope we meet again tomorrow. Bye-bye.